Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Today is a Stashin with Stephanie Day where we take a new fat quarter friendly pattern and show you how you can turn all your scraps into something fabulous and lovely. So today we are using Meriweather from Art Gallery Fabrics. It's a new line that came out from the AGF studio, and it is just lovely, and we're going to take a peek at that in just a second. But I want to tell you a little bit about the Stashin with Stephanie Club if you haven't heard about it before. We send out 12 fat quarters for the price of 10, $29.99 a month, and you also get the pattern that we developed to go with that fabric, and you get a $10 coupon that you can use to buy additional fabric to make the quilt bigger. We usually offer finishing kits as well, so that way if you really like the way we made it, then you're able to do the same. And it is just a ton of great benefits if you join the club, and it's just super fun. You get access to all of the patterns that we've released to date. I think this is our 17th pattern, so it is over a $200 value of free patterns just for joining, and then you'll start getting your fabric each month as well. So you can check that out over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. Let's take a peek at this month's fabric. This is a fun print that we're going to be using for the background. It's just really light and lovely and just makes a perfect little background, so that way you've got something there but not like a solid, but just a little bit of texture there. There are these fun medallions here, and even though this looks like you have to fussy cut, it actually works quite well in strips, which is how we're going to use it today. There are these beautiful little soft bunnies. And then we have the brighter pink with the florals, more bunnies, but in more of a peachy color. And I really love the feel of Art Gallery Fabrics. It's printed on a softer, silkier cotton substrate, so it's still quilting cotton, but it just is really lovely to work with. The feel and the hand of it is just unlike any other fabric that I feel like is out there right now. And so it makes for a really soft and beautiful quilt when it's all said and done. This green is just lovely. It's like green with some teal in it, which we all know I love teal. And this floral is fun too. It really pops against some of the lesser prints like the ones before. These bugs are super cute. You can't have a garden print without a few bugs in it. There was a teal background and then the brown as well. Some more florals. So this will just be a fun, cheery fabric to use during the winter doom and gloom. And you have some nice flowers. And the color palette, I feel, of Art Gallery is more sophisticated as well. So it fits more with today's home decor as opposed to some of the other ones that are really bright, and sometimes you wonder how you're going to make that work in your home. But these work very well in any contemporary home setting. All right, so let's get started with this month's tutorial. My goal when I design patterns is always to come up with something that looks more challenging than it actually is. And that is definitely true of this month's pattern. We're going to start off with some simple strip piecing. Then we're going to use a clear view triangle ruler. It is important that you use a ruler that has the tip on the top. Some of them have it where that top point is cut off and it is a flat top. And the math is very different for that type of ruler versus one that has all 3 points, like the Clearview triangle ruler, which is what I use whenever I'm doing anything with 60-degree triangles. And so you have to make sure that if it's not the Clearview, that it has all 3 points, or your math is not going to work out right and your quilt is not going to end up the right size, and you may not get enough triangles from the strip set. So there's your disclaimer, you do need this. We tend to use this ruler about every other month or so if you're a member of the Stash Club, and there are several patterns that use it as well in my book, Simple Quilts for the Modern Home, because I hate it when you have to get like a ruler and then you can never use it again. So if you like our patterns, you definitely will have many instances in which you can use this ruler. It is a great one to have in your arsenal. So we're going to start off with just some basic strip piecing. When I went through and I kind of paired fabrics together, I kind of separated them into light and dark, because eventually we're going to be making diamonds with these, and this will allow it to sort of have a light diamond next to a dark diamond to sort of give the eye a little bit of visual distinction between the two as we make our star blocks to go with this. So we're just going to flip these guys right sides together, and then we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam down one side. Strip piecing is a very basic skill. It's one of the first things you've learned. What I do is I just kind of line it up and I just get as many edges together as will fit on my sewing machine surface here. Then I put my finger at the edge to just kind of hold that together and let it come up to the point where I can no longer hold that together with my fingers anymore. Then I just repeat. There's no sense in trying to get everything lined up all the way down because things can shift a little bit as you're sewing, and this works very well. When I get to the point where I can no longer hold on to this here, what I do is I move my finger to the side, and that helps me guide everything through while maintaining that 1/4 inch stitch all the way down. Whenever you're working with 60-degree triangles, it's very helpful to press your seams open. It helps everything lie nice and flat and help you get great joints. So what I do is I just open those seams up, and then with 3 or 4 fingers down ahead of the nose of that iron, I just finger press it open and have the nose of the iron going straight down the center of that seam. Now when you look at this, it should be a very nice straight line. There should be no wiggles in there. If you see a wiggle where this isn't completely straight, that means you press the pleat in on the other side and it's not going to measure the correct size when you're done. So do make sure that you are paying attention to that. When you're all done with this, make sure to flip it over and press it from the other side as well to get a nice good flat seam. There are 2 types of triangles we're using for this quilt. There's going to be the one that's created from your strip piece unit and one that's created from a single width of fabric. You'll cut them the same, but I wanted to show it on the strip piece fabric so you can kind of see how that works. What you're going to do is you're going to line up your ruler so that the tip is even with the tip of your fabric, and that whatever inch line you are measuring to is even with the bottom of your fabric. That'll keep everything nice and square. Now you're going to slide it over so that you have at least 1/4 inch hanging off here, because we are going to need to use this half triangle to form the edges of our rows. So you want to make sure you're leaving a little bit of space, at least 1/2 inch from the left side of your ruler to the edge of your strip set. Once you're satisfied with where everything is at, you can go ahead and give it a trim along the sides. Like so. Now, what you want to do here is we want to actually trim this down. So I'm going to set this guy to the side for now. We've already got him cut. And I'm going to flip this around because I'm right-handed, so I was cut on the right side. So with the Clearview ruler, they also have lines going straight down that center there. So what you can do is you can line up that center line with your seam line, and then you can use a 1/4 inch line on your ruler to even that up with the point. So as long as you're nice and square here and then 1/4 inches here, then you're going to be able to cut a nice half equilateral triangle that includes your seam allowance, so that way this part can get caught in the binding when we sew our quilts together. Now you're going to continue cutting. I'm going to flip this ruler down so the point is now at the bottom, and I'm lining it the left edge up with the edge that we cut already, and I'm also going across here, and I'm making sure the point is now in line with the bottom. Now here's something that's really important. You want to make sure that your point is as pointy as the ruler is. If it is a flat top, then it means that you've added in some extra width into that triangle, and it's not going to fit together quite as well as it could have otherwise. That is a great point at the top. You want it to be as pointy as possible. All right, so we're going to go ahead and keep cutting down this strip. Now when you come to the end, we need to square up this side as well, so that way we have the edge of our row figured out again. And again, the easiest way to do that is to turn your ruler on its side, line up that center line with the seam, and then scooch it over, so that way your 1/4 inch mark is even with the top of that triangle tip, and then give it a little trim. Now here's really one important thing that I'm going to point out here. Because you have an even number of triangles that are going to be cut from this strip set, that means when I cut the edges, they're both going to be going the same way. Now we need ones that are the same fabric that are going with that straight edge on one side. So this is not going to work when you go to put your piece together, which means the next time you cut the same strip set unit, what you need to do is, instead of starting from the bottom left and having your point at the top, you need to start at the top left and have your point at the bottom, and then you will have the reverse of that. Another really easy way to do it is when you are lining your strip sets up, you can just line them up right on top of each other like this, and then do your cutting, and then you will have units that will work together. So this quilt goes together in rows rather than in blocks. I normally don't do this because I like to plan each block out, which I definitely did by laying everything out for this quilt. But in this instance, in order to avoid Y seams, this was the easiest way to make it happen. So if you can't lay everything out, so you don't have a design wall or a spare bed, and just leave it out, what I recommend doing is working 4 rows at a time, because that's a nice manageable amount to get your rows sewn together. And then if you don't have time to sew them all together that day as well to join your rows, you can always do that a little bit later. Just label what row number it is, put a little pin in with a little post-it note, and you'll be ready to come back to it later. So there's essentially 2 types of rows that we're going to make, whether it's the top of a diamond or the bottom of a diamond block. So in this case, I'm showing you one that is sort of the middle of it, because we have some seams that need to go together to match. So I want to make sure I show you how to do that, because that is the critical part of this, because these diagonal seams here are going to match and come together perfectly, and then it will be fabulous. So here we've got the start of the row, we have our nice half triangle here, and then we have part of a diamond that's poking out, and then this is part of a second diamond here that is starting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip these guys right sides together, and whether you're working this row or another row where you don't have to match these up, you're still going to assemble it the same way, because you're essentially just sewing equilateral triangles together. You just have to pin a little bit when you have seams that are going to match. All right, so what I'd like to do is kind of look at this from the top, and what I want to do is make sure that those seams that we pressed open are right on top of each other. So that way we've got it going one way and the other way, and those seams are just laying right on top of one another like that. Then I take my pin and I pin in the right side of that seam allowance, right within that 1/4 inch of where I'm going to be sewing. And so now when I sew, I'm able to sew down here, and I will stop with my needle down in the first half of the seam allowance and then remove this pin. And the reason why I stop there is because that needle, when it's down, kind of acts like a pin and makes sure that these seam joins are going to stay nice and tight and right where we want them when we are sewing it together. And then you can safely remove your pin and sew the rest of the way down. So I'm going to go ahead and get these guys the rest of the way together. One thing to note, the rest of these do not have seams that we have to worry about joining. So for these, you can just flip them right sides together like I'm doing here. And there are an odd number of pieces in each row, so you're always going to have your end piece will be left out for the first pass through of these. And then what I do is I just stack them on top of each other, and then I turn them so that the side I'm going to sew is parallel to where my sewing machine is going to be. That way I can just lift it and come straight to my machine, and I'm less likely to accidentally sew down the wrong side, because this is all the same shape. It's really easy to make that mistake. But for me, I find that if I just turn it like this, so I can just pick this up, put it in my sewing machine, then I'm less likely to make that mistake and have to rip and redo. So we're still sewing with that regular 1/4 inch seam. I'm just going to go ahead and sew to the point, again, where my needle's down the first half of that seam allowance. Then I'll pull that pin, and then I hold my finger on the tip of the triangle just to keep everything together. We are working on a bias here, so you want to make sure that you're not letting anything stretch out. So you want to let the feed dogs move the fabric through. You don't want to pull or tug or anything, because you can warp the fabric. And again, because I've got it laid out the way, so I just have to pick this up and bring it to the sewing machine, I can just grab my next 2 that I already have right sides together, get those points lined up one last time, and just feed it through. And that takes a little bit of the thinking out of it, and it makes it more of an enjoyable process. We're going to press these seams open as well. It's really going to help us have great joins when we put those points together, which I'm going to show you in the next step when we join our rows. But what I do, you just want to make sure you lift and press when you get to those seams, because you do not want to press anything going in the opposite direction. You want them to remain nice and open. And again, once I'm done with one side, I'll press from the other side as well. Now typically at this step, I'll take all of my twosies that I've sewn together and bring them over to whatever surface I'm using to lay everything out, whether it's a large table or a bed or a design wall if you're lucky enough to have one of those. And I make sure that everything is in the right spot, because like for this one, there's going to be a corresponding diamond on top. And for this one, there's going to be a corresponding part of the star on top. And you just want to make sure that everything is looking the way it should and that you've got your pieces together. So I highly recommend you do that. Now for this part, this is why I do not trim those dog ears off, because at this point, we're able to match up this point here with the point of our triangle below, which is very useful. So I can just flip these guys right sides together. And you can see that the dog ear here is going to correspond nicely with my triangle underneath, and same thing at the bottom. I know it's a little bit hard to see with all the white here, but you can see here you've got that little dog ear triangle, and the triangle there matches really nicely. So I don't even pin at the step. I just line up my points at the top and my points at the bottom as I'm sewing. And then down here, your point should be coming to the point where we measured, where that 1/4 inch seam starts. So you should be able to still see your entire 1/4 inch seam hanging off to the left or the right, depending on what side of the row you're doing, because that is going to stay in place and that will be caught up in your binding when we're all done. That way we have points going all the way out to the edge of our quilt. So this is what it should look like: points lined up at one end and your 1/4 inch seam hanging out past on the other end. And that's going to vary for the right or left side depending on what half of the row you're working on. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and sew these guys together. For these, I also just stack them right on top of each other, and then I just work on the specifics of lining them up as I'm sewing them together. So just like before, I'm just going to press these open, doing the lift and press so that I don't accidentally press any seams going in the wrong direction here. And I always press from first from the wrong side and then second from the right side. And you'll notice here that we have 3 seams coming together. So we've got the seam from here, this triangle, and this triangle, and they make a nice little point right here that is about a 1/4 inch away from the edge, and that's going to come in very handy when we sew our rows together. So continue sewing for your sets of 2 into 4 and 4 into 8 and so on until your entire row is joined, and then we're going to come back and sew our rows together. I just want to point out our join here is really fabulous. It's kind of hard to tell because you have that light one again next to the dark one, which was purposeful, but those points are coming just together, and this is just turning right around. So it's going to form a nice little hexagon within your star itself. So it just is really neat and cute that way. All right, so I'm going to finish sewing this row together, and then we will be right back to sew them all together. So I've got my 2 rows lined up right on top of each other, and you can see how they kind of make the center of a star. It makes more sense when you get 4 rows together, then you can see a complete star. But you can see how when it comes together, it starts to make the pattern work together. All right, so there's a couple of things that I want to show you, mainly a 2 pinning method for when you are joining your triangles right here. So I'm just going to start with right at the beginning of this, and we're going to zoom in a little bit so you can see exactly what I'm doing and learn how to get perfect joints every single time. All right, so you can see that we have 3 triangles coming together here and here, and they make a nice little point here. And in this case, we're maybe a little bit close to a 1/4 inch here and probably right on with this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip these guys right sides together. Then using my first pin, I'm going to put that right in where all those 3 seams come together to make that triangle from the back side. Then from the right side, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing, putting it right at the tip of that triangle again. Now, one thing to note here is that sometimes your dog ears are not going to line up right on top of each other. That's okay. Don't pay attention to that. What you want to make sure is that these 2 tips of the triangle are right on top of each other, and then pinch that so that your needle is going straight up and down. That'll mean that they will stay right on top of each other until you can take a second pin and then just pin right across that seam. And then you're okay to remove this pin. And so that will hold everything in place until it is time for you to sew everything together. As you're sewing, also pay attention to where you're going to have our strip piece seams joining together, and make sure you are lining those up on top of each other as well. And in this case, I typically pin on a diagonal going along with the seam, always on the right side of the seam allowance, because when we sew this, we're going to sew down here, so that way I can sew up into the point and get as close to this pin as possible, then pull it. Same thing here, I will sew until I get to this point here, and once my needle's down the first half of that seam allowance, pull a second pin and make it the rest of the way down. So go ahead and continue pinning down your row until you have gotten all that all together, and then we're gonna sew and press, and we have then covered everything that you need to know in order to make this quilt. So when I'm sewing at this step, what I do is I sew pretty slowly as I approach those points, and then I'm just going to sew just to the right of where all three of those triangles come together. And as long as you are just one needle width to the right, you are always going to be able to see those points. Just like always, we're going to press these seams open so that way we get really nice sharp points, and also it lays really flat, which means you have a lot of possibilities when you go to quilt, and you can quilt right into those. I have no issues with seams popping or anything. I think it's kind of an old school thing that sewing machines today, they can definitely handle sewing with seams open and pressed open, and I long arm all of these and stitch in the ditch and everything, and I've never had a problem with the seam popping on a quilt. So we've got our two rows sewn together now, and you can see that by taking the time to pin, we've got some really great joints going around here, as well as in the center, and then on the outside of the blocks where all those points are just coming together beautifully, especially here where you have 6 points all coming together, and it's because of that double pinning method. So I highly recommend you give that a go and then press your seams open, and it will make your life a lot easier, and you will have much better results and be much happier with your finished quilt. Well, thanks so much for following along with this video tutorial. Make sure you head on over to shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. You can check out this and all the other Stashin with Stephanie patterns that use up fat quarter scraps. And again, if you join the club, you're going to get 12 fat quarters for the price of 10 every month, plus a free pattern each month that's new, access to all of the ones that we have released to date, which is over a $200 value, and you get inspiration and ideas every month that you can make with this, and you get that $10 off a $20 purchase coupon code, so you can get additional fabrics, you can get a finishing kit, or just more of it if you want to do something different than what we've suggested with it. And all that is available over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this video tutorial, and until next week, happy quilting.